Hello, guys, and welcome once again to the bigger picture with Martha. Today we are sitting here with Mr. Cas Coovadia. Mr. Coovadia is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. There has been a lot of developments taking place in the country, Mr. Coovadia, along the business landscape. I think yesterday or day before yesterday, the GDP figures came out. They're not looking good. A week or so ago, it was a labor force survey, which sort of gave us a glimpse of hope that we were sort of turning the corner in as far as our recovery from COVID is concerned. But we have since seen from those GDP figures that the road is still long. And as a result, I think this interview is quite necessary from yourself as a leader of business sector or business community in South Africa. And with those words, welcome and thank you very much for making time for us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right. Before we start, I would like you to clarify something for us. One, as we were preparing to come here, I was laboring under the impression that you are actually the CEO of CEOs, but I have since learned from I subscribed to Prof. Bona Mohale's online mastery course, Leadership and Ethics, and I learned that BLSA side are actually the CEO of CEOs. Please clarify the two roles.
Well, if you speak to Busi Mavuso at BLSA,
Yeah.
she'll tell you I'm a boss.
Oh, you are the boss.
Because BLS, and I don't agree with that, I'm not anybody's boss. BLSA is a member of BUSA.
Oh, I see.
Okay? BUSA's membership are business organizations, not corporates.
Oh.
So we are a confederal body, and we represent every major sector in the country. And Business Leadership South Africa being a member, through that we represent the top 100 companies. Or whatever the case may be.
My assumption was correct then, that you are the CEO of all other CEOs.
Yeah, so BUSA's role and mandate is macroeconomic policy influence advocacy mandate.
I see.
So we would pick up issues and we would deal with issues that are cross-cutting across the economy. BLSA to a certain extent would do the same.
Yeah.
But BLSA, BUSA and I talk often, and we sort of agree on what BUSA should be taking up and what BLSA should be taking up. And we work very closely together. But for the other members of BUSA, so the Banking Association, for instance, is a member of BUSA. The Banking Association will deal with all banking-related issues. We don't get involved in that. We don't get... Unless Bongi Kunene at the Banking Association picks up the phone to me and says, Cas, look, on this particular issue, can you guys help, right? But we would, so where the Banking Association deals with, for instance, expropriation of land, that's an issue that cuts across the economy. Mm-hmm. And so what the Banking Association would do is say, Cas, we've done some work on it. We'll share the work with you, but BUSA obviously needs to front load this and need to lead the challenge lead the charge on this.
Yes.
So that's how we work with our members. And so we would lead the charge on the cross-cutting issues and the macroeconomic issues. Members in that different sectors will concentrate on what they need to concentrate on.
Thanks very much for that clarity. But let's get back to the core business of this visit. I want to start first by let's talk about the protest march that was held, I think, sometime last month by COSATU, SAFTU, and other unions for what they said was an awareness march to both government and business leadership in South Africa around the level of unemployment, poor growth, and that has since been confirmed through let's say figures that were released yesterday. High unemployment and ever increasing food prices. Now, I want to find out from you, what from the business side of view or point of view, what has been your reaction to that protest march? I mean, we know, and there've been reports that says that some of your members are sitting on huge unencumbered cash reserves, and they are not willing to invest that back into the economy. So with those demands that organized labor have raised, what has been BUSA's reaction?
Okay, so we publicly said the following. One, the right to march or right to protest in our country is protected, and we respect the right of, be it COSATU or SAFTU or any other organization, to protest, so long as it's legal and so on. What we also said is that the issues that were raised are valid issues. I mean, we agree that we need growth. We agree that we need to create employment. But what we also said is that we think it's counterintuitive to have the sort of protest which talks to unemployment and lack of growth, and a protest that actually exacerbates, business's ability to do business, and that then leads to higher unemployment, and it actually makes it difficult for us to grow. And so that was our view, and we've said consistently that it's not in the interests of a company to keep money in a bank instead of investing that money to grow their businesses, make profits, distribute dividends, and in the process create employment as well. They in the medium to long term, they have far greater income and far greater additionality from investing that money to keeping it in the bank, all right? And we've said consistently that businesses are not investing to the extent that they should because there isn't an environment for investment in our country. And it's government's job to create that environment. And let me give you one topical example. So when the president lifted the ceiling on embedded energy from 10 megawatts to 100 megawatts, he actually went above the head of his minister. We welcomed that. And what's been the result of that? A few months after that, we have close on to 3 billion rand worth of projects on embedded energy that's in the channels. Obviously, that energy won't get onto the grid for about 18 months or so, but it will get onto the grid in 18 months. Those projects have been passed by NERSA, and building has started on those projects. So create the environment and the investment will flow.
From what you said, partly one agrees with you that it was counterintuitive for organized labor to make it hard or to stop business from making operating while they sort of complaining that there's high unemployment in the country. And I raised this question to COSATU. I think I spoke to COSATU just 2 days after that set march. Their argument is that they have spoken, and it appears that business and government are both not willing to listen to an extent that they had to go to the streets to force you to listen. Where do you think the backlog is in terms of how business and labor and government communicate? Where is the backlog?
Well, we communicate all the time. We talk all the time at NEDLAC.
But more like past each other. You
Yeah,
talk
exactly.
all the time.
We don't communicate. We don't talk about the right issues. I don't think we talk about the right issues, number one. Number two, there's a sort of culture in our country that says that we've got to reach consensus on every issue. And we're not going to reach consensus on every issue, right? And we've consistently said that government, whether government likes it or not, they cannot say that they will conduct themselves as business and labor must conduct themselves. Okay? Government is elected. They are responsible for the laws and regulations in this country. Okay? They need to govern and they need to lead. Okay? If they take the view that every critical issue will be discussed at NEDLAC and no decisions will be taken until we reach consensus, well then it's not surprising the situation we are in. Right? So we've taken the consistent view that we can talk at NEDLAC, but government also needs to talk bilaterally to us, to labor and whoever else they want to talk to on a whole range of issues. And if those bilaterals show that we're all on the same page, that's great, we can move forward. But if there are differences, let's say between business and labor on a particular issue, you shouldn't be saying, okay, let's have another 10 meetings until we reach agreement. Government should say, okay, we've talked to both of you. In the national interest, this is our decision, and that's what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely.
And then there's certainty. We might not be happy totally with the decision that they take,
But ultimately,
but we've got a certain environment to work in. We can work in that environment, and so on. So that's why we're saying that we talk often, but we can't talk and engage with a view to trying to reach consensus on everything. Because then what happens is we just end up spinning wheels. And so on economic growth, on the economy, what we need to do to get business to invest and so on, we don't need further analysis. We don't need further research. We all know what we need to do.
Absolutely.
We just need to do it.
All right. No, thank you very much, Mr. Coovadia. I would like to move you slightly to the ANC policy conference, because I think there's a sort of a link to just what you just said right now. From that policy conference, there were a number of issues that came out. Some of those issues are not really new. I mean, the issue of nationalization of the Reserve Bank has been there, I think, for more than 2 decades now. Yeah. Every policy conference has got that issue. The land expropriation without compensation. But now, one that sort of caught my attention was the emphasis on wealth tax, in particular to finance the BIG, the Basic Income Grant. I think it was somewhere during the course of this week, the acting DG for Treasury has since came out and said wealth tax might not necessarily be sufficient to finance the BIG mandate. What I want to find out from you as BUSA, what do you think would be the impact, the economic impact of introduction of BIG into in South African economy?
We just can't afford it. That's the bottom line. I mean, we are in a difficult fiscal situation. The interest we pay on our debt is the second largest expense item in the budget. The more that interest goes up, the less we have for social expenditure and other types of expenditure. We can talk about a wealth tax. The bottom line is that South Africa's tax base is very narrow. Very few people are paying taxes. If you increase the taxes of those who are paying taxes, the reaction will be one that says, well, we're just not going to, we'd rather cut back on the work we do. We'd rather have less income because we just can't afford this anymore. That doesn't help at all.
No.
So we've done a couple of reports and they're public. We're saying that you could increase that, you could do a wealth tax, you could fund it from the fiscus, you could increase debt. None of those are actually sustainable. Now, again, can we have everything that everybody puts on the table in this country? We can't. We need to make some choices. And it's hard to make those choices, right? We need some mechanisms in the short to medium term to alleviate the plight of those who are at the most at the butt end of what's happening at the moment, the increased food prices, lack of growth, unemployment, and so on. But we need to do that in a way that we can manage it fiscally. Number two, we can have all sorts of ideological debates on this, but the reality is that we are in a situation at the moment where if we don't get investment in and we don't grow the economy, we don't allow existing businesses to grow and new businesses to form, we're not going to take care of the unemployment issue, we're not going to take care of the poverty issue, we're not going to take care of people's problems, all right? So we've got to accept, and I know there are a lot of people who don't like that. I mean, I come from an activist background. I grew up in the UDF and the ANC and so on, right? Some of these things don't sit very comfortably with me as well, right? But the reality
is something else.
Is something else. And unless we actually create that environment where investors say, no, we can actually put our money there because, one, it's going to be safe. We'll get the returns on our money. Property will be protected, blah, blah, blah. And businesses then form of that investment. And we're absolutely clear. If you look at the economic growth strategy document we put together in the midst of COVID, it was the president keeps on saying, business gave me a 1,000-page document. Well, we did deep dives into 49 sectors, and we arrived at 11 sectors that we felt should be picked up quickly post-COVID and so on. But a central point of that document is that it's not just rebuilding our economy post-COVID, it's repositioning our economy. And the way we reposition it, that it's got to be an inclusive economy. We can't. The economic growth is not sustainable if the majority of the people don't have a stake in the economy.
Absolutely.
Right? So we've got to develop that economy in that way. But we can't do that without the investment. Right? So, and the other thing we've got to appreciate is, I met some investors from UK and US a couple of days ago, and they're telling me that they are looking at investing in countries to the north of us. And that they say that South Africa is no longer the gateway to Africa. They don't need to come to South Africa to invest in Ghana or to invest in Kenya. They can go directly there. Because those people, those governments are saying, guys, we're open for business.
Come to us.
Because if you invest here and we grow our economy, we're going to create jobs. There's no but at the end of that sentence. Okay, so we're competing for that investment. And we're not competing with countries far away. We're competing with countries just to our neighbors. We are. Recently I saw a report yesterday on the top 20 growth countries in Africa. We're not in the top 20. Okay, we're not in the top 20. So we've got to ask ourselves why. Right? So I'm not saying. Believe me, I'm not saying these are easy issues to deal with.
Absolutely not.
But, the role of government and the reason you are there is that you've got to act in the national interest, not in business interests, not in labor's interests, not in the interests of community groups. You've got to talk to all of them. And you've got to talk to us. We'll squeal like crazy, government doesn't talk to us. But talk to us all. But then make the call.
At the end of the day.
At the end of the day, give us the confidence that you are showing leadership, you are taking decisions, give investors the confidence that you are showing leadership and taking decisions, because that's what investors look for. They look for certainty. Okay, and that's what we need in this country.
You raised a couple of issues, and one was around the issue of VAT. I'm sure you would have seen the report by OECD, which proposed that we consider raising the OECD, going back now to the BIG. We should consider rather VAT increase in order to fund BIG, which was in itself a strange policy recommendation, considering what it seeks to solve. You also, oh well, alongside that thought, I'm sitting here and I'm asking myself, from business perspective, is it not about time that maybe you start making noise about either the removal or suspension of basic minimum wages? And I know this is a very thorny issue, especially with labor. But the suspension of that law for a period of time for our economy to be able to absorb as many people as it possibly can. Because it doesn't make sense that one would want to receive 650 while there's a chance that the same person can receive 3,000 rand, for instance, and be able to gain their dignity by waking up in the morning and work for themselves. I know 3,000 rand sounds not like much, but what you can do with 3,000 is 5 times what a person with 600 can do. What do you think about that?
So look, again, working together and talking with each other at times also necessitates compromise, right? We were obviously significantly involved in the discussion on the minimum wage issue. And where we eventually came out is that it's a compromise we could live with, right? But at the same time, we said that while it's not just the wages issue that's an issue in the sort of labor market, right? You speak to most businesses, particularly small and medium businesses, they'll tell you that the biggest issue they have is that if somebody isn't performing, they need to fire that person. And that person goes to the CCMA, and this thing drags out, all right? A small business can't close their business and sit at the CCMA.
No.
A big business can send their lawyers there, right, and carry on with their business.
With the business.
And it's those sorts of issues that we need to deal with. We need to appreciate, or particularly the unions need to appreciate, because at times I feel that the unions conduct their struggle, and they've got to conduct their struggle, as if we are still in the 80s. Right? In the 80s, we had apartheid. We had a government that concentrated on the minority of the people in this country. We had a justified struggle, and we fought them. Right? Today, we have a democratically elected government. We have a whole lot of problems in the country. We work within the context of a global economy. We punch above our weight in many instances globally. But at the end of the day, we are a little dot in the southern side of the world. Right? Very few countries and people bothered with what we do. We're not going to change the structure of the global economy, whether we want to change it or not. So we've got to find ways and means of working within that structure, right? And I think that what the way unions conduct their struggle and represent their members in a country that has a 10% unemployment rate as against a country that has a 40% or 35% unemployment rate is very different. And unions have got to move beyond just representing their members and seeing how we actually grow employment. And growing employment means that for a period of time, your concentration has got to be to get as many people employed as possible. As you say, it's not just from an income point of view, which is important, it's from a dignity point of view, right? And if people are employed, if people start interacting with those who are employed, because people are resilient. They pull themselves up.
Absolutely.
And we saw that during the struggle days. I mean, this whole thing about this dependency syndrome is not something we learned from those days. It's something we've created
ourselves.
post-democracy.
Absolutely.
All right?
Yeah.
When I used to, I was the general secretary of a civic called X-Top in the inner city in those days. I used to we used to organize in residential buildings in Hillbrow, in Joubert Park, in the inner city. And I used to be there early hours of the morning, organizing. I can't remember a single flat committee that said, listen, we want you to do this for us. Okay? They will always say, this is our plan. This is what we want to do. How can you help?
This is where you want to.
Yeah. How can you help? Okay? People were in charge of their own lives. We need to enable people to be in charge of their own lives again. Right? And so I agree. I think the minimum wage thing was a compromise. It was a compromise because people, we needed to have a situation where people were assured of at least some sort of minimum income. But that's not the only tactic we employ.
Yeah.
That doesn't increase employment. We need to now say, okay, people have a minimum wage. There's some at least decent work. But now how do we increase employment? And to increase employment, we have to say that people are going to have to get in at different tiers, at different levels, and grow and develop from there. Back that up with legislation and regulation that avoids total exploitation and so on, and then apply that if people actually go outside of that. And we would totally support that. We don't want to, and we need to be absolutely clear, we don't want slave labor, we don't want super exploitation, but we do need to recognize that there are certain pragmatic decisions that need to be taken.
All right, thank you very much. No, it's fine. Let's try to move it.
I'll be a bit short.
Yeah, I would like your take on the labor issue. It's one that's very interesting, but I would like us to move slightly forward to a question of ethics, and the perception that is created out there. 2009 to 2017 was a tough year for us as a nation. There were a lot of cases of corruption that culminated with the State Capture Commission, and stuff that we had there were shocking, to say the least. But what was more shocking or even disappointing was the fact that not only did we have state capture players congregated in government or public sector, we had players, enablers coming from the private sector. I think companies such as McKinsey, Nedbank, and to this day, some of these companies are still members of BUSA. BUSA hasn't really acted to a full extent of accountability, I would say, with some of these members. Now, the question is, before I get to the question and try to create sort of give you a background, we saw in the same period, there was a Steinhoff, which mismanaged what was called accounting irregularity, mismanaged huge amounts of public resources from PIC. At the same period, there was Dr. Iqbal Save's companies that also took huge amount of money from PIC and did not pay back. But the reaction to these issues or to these challenges was different, was not constant. Dr. Iqbal Save's companies, I think, at some point were threatened with bank account closure because banks were saying that there's reputational risk associated with their association with him or his companies. Steinhoff company bank accounts continues to operate as if nothing happened. There were banks, BUSA and others, who were involved in currency manipulation. And it would appear that BUSA, for the greater part, especially in as far as state capture is concerned, you were vocal. But when the private sector players get involved in some of these shenanigans, BUSA loses its voice. Why is that perception so, or why is that the case?
Okay, so firstly, let me just say that post the Zondo report, we publicly said that absolutely corruption and state capture wasn't a one-way street. Businesses aided and abetted it, right? We also said that everybody Zondo mentions in his report, what does Zondo say about those businesses he mentioned? That he believes those businesses need to be investigated, and if there's a prima facie case against them, they need to be prosecuted. We agreed with that. We publicly agreed with that, okay? And we still stand by that, all right? Nedbank, McKinsey, Bains aren't BUSA members. As I said, we don't have corporates as members. Our members, so our member is a banking association. Nedbank is a member of the banking association.
Well, indirectly, that
Yeah,
is.
yeah. So BLSA, for instance, at one point suspended Bain, and then they took them in again, right? When the Zondo report came out, we picked up the phone to BLSA, and we said, there's a problem here. And BLSA suspended them, and they're no longer members of BLSA. BLSA had suspended PwC at that time, had suspended McKinsey at that time. And then so PwC then went through a whole process to restructure and so on. McKinsey's reached agreement to repay monies and all of that. All of that was done. The state agreed on certain processes and procedures with some of the firms. When those firms met what they agreed with the state, BLSA took them back. Okay, and BLSA couldn't then justify why they couldn't take them back. If the state agreed with them and they met what the state said, they met what the state said. We are absolutely clear. I mean, after the Zondo report, I picked up the phone to Mike Brown at Nedbank.
Yeah.
And I said, Mike, what's your views on this? And Mike met with Bonang, myself, and Adrian, and took us through the whole process of what they gave Zondo and so on and so on. And they said, we gave them all the information. Zondo does say in his report that he didn't have enough time to actually call us there and give our side of the story. We still want to give our side of the story. And we would welcome any investigation. Okay, so we were happy with that sort of response, all right? So again, if we are quite clear that let government, and that's why we said, again, publicly, if we can help with the resources and capacity to enable government to speed up their investigations, even of those businesses, we've offered that, right? I know for a fact that a BUSA member is working with the NPA to actually increase the NPA's capacity to
deal with this.
Deal with Steinhoff.
Yeah.
To deal specifically with Steinhoff. Okay? So I think that the short answer to this is those business organizations that have members that were mentioned in Zondo, Bain went beyond the pale. They're no longer part of any business organization. Others were suspended, and they were taken back in after they reached agreement with government on certain things. Others, we have said that we agree with Zondo that they must be investigated. And if they're investigated and they're found to be wanting, they must be charged, and then an organization like BUSA or BLSA will make a call on what they do with those organizations. So we're absolutely clear that must be done, and we will stand by that.
All right. Thanks for that. On the same issue or similar issue, you would know that recently there was a threat of grey listing for us as a country, and at the heart of that is a poor control, financial controls, that we are sort of our systems can easily be compromised to finance terrorism or even for activities such as money laundering. And recently, I think it was SARS which secured seizure and search for tobacco industry bosses. Among other things that were found there is that billions of rands were transferred from South Africa elsewhere around the world. Doesn't this lend credence to those who are sitting from outside and say South African financial controls are lacking, and therefore South Africa can be used as a hub from which terrorists can be funded for their operations and activities, or money can be laundered around the world with ease? And why is banking association as your member? What are they saying, or what are you saying to them in this regard?
So, as you know, I was MD of the Banking Association for many years, and we interacted with FATFs quite a bit. I mean, I used to send somebody annually to the FATF meetings. Right? There was a threat of grey listing at the time when government was delaying the passing of the amendments to the Financial Intelligence Center.
Yeah.
Right? And we were in Parliament convincing government that they need to pass it, okay, which eventually was passed. But if that wasn't passed, we would have been grey listed. Right? So the South African financial sector, even by FATF, has consistently been recognized as, we were, until all the state capture and the impact of all of them, we were amongst the top 4 banking sectors in the world. Right? Mm. So we recognize as a very effective and a safe banking sector in many instances. Currently, so if you speak to the governor of the Reserve Bank, he'll tell you that the Reserve Bank and the financial sector has done everything it can to avoid the grey listing. What FATF is looking for now is what is government doing about Zondo's recommendations. Okay? So Zondo has pointed out a whole lot of stuff. Well, what are you doing about it? Because if there's action on that, then we're happy. If there's no action on that, we've got a problem, right? Mm. So we have impressed upon government, as BUSA, as a CISA, that look, this is what the financial sector has done. Okay, this is what the Reserve Bank has done. These are the outstanding issues, the bulk of which fall within government. Okay, and again, if we need to work together to deal with those issues, let's work together to deal with those issues. Is there scope for money laundering and so on through the financial sector in this country? Of course there is. And that's because we essentially a very sophisticated and first world financial sector that has the mechanism and the systems to transfer money and so on. And here, that's why we have the Financial Intelligence Center Act in place. Right? So if a bank sees movement of money through an account that shouldn't be there, and they don't report it to the Financial Intelligence Center office, and subsequently they found to have been lacking and there's been money laundering on that, the full might of the law must be taken against that bank. Absolutely. Because that's the way we show that we're serious about implementing the legislation we have. Right? And so, I was, again, when I was at BUSA, a couple of unions actually asked to meet me, and they say, you guys are discriminating against the Guptas. Why are you closing the Gupta's accounts? right? And you know, and that you guys aren't actually giving the full reasons and so on. And I said, we have confidentiality clauses with all clients and
Can't
so on.
disclose.
If the Guptas want banks to disclose why banks are closing their accounts,
Let them do
all they have to do is tell the bank that they're waiving the confidentiality. So if you happen to talk to the Guptas, ask them to do that. Right?
which they never did.
They never did, right? So I think that firstly, I think we have one of the strengths, even in all the world competitive reports, is our financial sector. Okay, we have, in our view, we have a very, very good and efficient reserve bank. We have efficient laws to deal with issues like money laundering and so on. What we would fully support is that if any financial institution acts outside of that law, then the full might of that law must take effect. Right?
You know, I do appreciate your position as as BUSA on those issues. However, and please bear with me here. As I said in a brief background around this issue, 2015 there was this currency manipulation. Nothing happened to the role players. Well, as far as the public would know, some of the CEOs just simply came and apologized to say, yes, my institution was caught wanting, and we are sorry. The implications to the poor men on the street or to the economy were sort of by the wayside. And now we hear BUSA say the risk of grey listing rests with government, or is purely due to, or in part due to government inaction to deal with the Zondo report. Now it looks like there is somewhere the system is not working as it should. We know that from government perspective, there's huge capacity issues when it comes to dealing with some of these issues. But to show seriousness from BUSA side, what are you doing to assist? I know you said you from Stanhope case, some of your members are involved in that case to help NPA to deal with that particular case. But would it not perhaps sort of make you look, or make BUSA look serious in setting up or having a constant structure or some kind of a ready available structure that helps government deal with some of these cases or some of these issues? Because we know how sophisticated these cases, financial cases, can be. And if we just leave them to government to deal with, we're going to turn cray. I would even come and retire myself while still waiting for accountability.
Yeah. So look, we haven't formed a permanent structure, but so there are legal firms helping the NPA at the moment, right? There are others helping the NPA at the moment. If you speak to people in the NPA, and I do that, they'll tell you that, we've got the help, but the problem now, right, in the rest of the criminal justice system. Okay? Now, so there was a time when we had business people in helping the police force and advising the police force and so on, right? So business has indicated that we're willing to second capacity to address some of the critical deficiencies in government, right? But it's for government to decide what sort of capacity they need, and government needs to show a receptivity to take in that capacity. That's the first point.
Mr. Coovadia, I would like us to move to, I think I would call it the bigger elephant in the room, ESCOM. ESCOM has been having challenges for a number of years now. In fact, I think 2 days ago, they reintroduced load shedding. with the liberalization of the sector introduced by the president through the new energy plan, that together with Eskom's big debt burden of 400 billion, how do you see Eskom navigating its way through that debt burden? Because with that liberalization, obviously it's going to take away part of its revenue. Now, how do you see Eskom surviving that?
Yeah, so to us, we're now taking the view that it's not an Eskom problem, it's an energy problem. Okay, and we've supported the President's energy plan, which includes a restructuring of Eskom, and decision was taken to restructure Eskom quite a few years ago. Hasn't been implemented to any great extent, and that's one of, if you're talking about big elephants in the room, the big elephant in the room is our inability to implement decisions. But be that as it may, that will be done. We think that, and the President, in announcing the plan, did indicate that in the medium-term budget, there will be some announcement on government perhaps turning some of the Eskom debt into equity or restructuring that debt in some form or other to enable Eskom to conduct its business in a way that it doesn't have that burden on itself. Okay? And we don't know what that's going to be. We haven't, but that's a move in the right direction. We're quite clear that at the end of the implementation of this plan of the President's, and we are working very closely with the Presidency through NECOM, the National Energy Committee, and looking at how we can actually bring capacity and expertise to bear to help implement the plan. And those discussions are going very well at the moment. Once that plan is implemented, Eskom will become a player in the energy environment, not the player.
Yeah.
And the Eskom management and executive is quite clear about that, and they actually agree with that. We therefore need to now concentrate on how we ensure that there are no barriers in the way of the private sector producing renewable energy. There are no barriers in the way of the private sector producing, the ceiling has been lifted on the embedded energy, and there'll be more investment in that. And that's what the concentration has got to be on. We've also got to concentrate on, within that context, to say that we've made significant commitments for carbon reduction, and how we actually manage our energy infrastructure and how this plan unfolds has also got to take that into account. So this thing about Eskom 2, for instance, we want to build more coal power stations and so on, is just a non-starter. You can't build more coal-powered fire stations. You're not going to be able to finance it because a number of the banks even here
have come out and
have said they're not, because it will impact on the global businesses if they do that. So we accept as business, and we're actually promoting that as an interim measure towards cleaner energy. Gas has got to be a factor, and our European counterparts and American counterparts and so on have got to accept that. And our discussions with them are telling them that. But we've got to, Eskom has now got to be seen within the context of a different energy mix. Eskom will play a role in that, but there will be, and the private sector will get involved increasingly, we believe, in the distribution side of energy. The wheeling part of this has got to be improved and increased so that local authorities, municipalities, and others are able to acquire energy from different sources and get that energy competitively to end users. So it's all of those things at play. It's not just an ESCOM issue, and we are working with government quite closely at the moment at a technical level to see how we can actually get all these moving parts together.
Speaking of technical aspect, there was a criticism. I'm not sure if you saw the article authored by one Mr. Marcelo Coco, the former CEO at ESCOM. Among many things that he criticizes ESCOM and the current structure, in particular leadership structure, is that at the board of ESCOM, there is no generation engineer. You have, in fact, I think the chairperson is an immunologist. You don't have somebody who understands generation at a technical level. What do you think that is an impact of that lack of capacity?
No, absolutely, significant impact. And the chair of the ESCOM board will be the first to tell you that. We've raised with government, and I know he has raised with government, that it's been about 2 or 3 years since the ESCOM board was, because of resignations and people being told to leave and so on, has been decimated. And you probably have half the board, actually. And government hasn't replaced people. And that's why I say the big elephant in the room is that we don't implement. This should have been done 2 years ago, and we have urged government to replenish the ESCOM board with the necessary expertise and necessary skills. These shouldn't be political appointments. These should be people who can actually enable the board to play the oversight role it needs to play and the strategic role it needs to play. But it cannot play that role if we don't have directors who understand some of the critical issues that are relevant to ESCOM's operations. Otherwise, what does the board do? The board simply rubber stamps the executive together, and that's not the way. That shouldn't be the role of board, because then they bring irresponsible.
Absolutely.
But government is a shareholder. It is government's responsibility to replenish the board and replenish the board. They have the opportunity to actually put in place the relevant expertise and resources that are needed on that board, and they must do that. So absolutely, it's a significant weakness, and I know that the ESCOM board chair has been urging government to actually deal with that for the last good few months.
All right. As we wrap up, Mr. Coovadia, I've been gathering so much information, been through your website, and out of interest, I came to learn that one of your policy and strategic objectives is to create an inclusive economy that creates sustainable employment. And with that, I saw in your annual performance, in your annual report, as I was going through those that information on your website, I noticed that your board has got about 14 members, and only 5 are women. And I was really, really curious to say, if your strategic objective is to create an inclusive economy, a transformed and inclusive economy, why is your board still skewed against women? Why do we have fewer women than men in the board? And I must say, your management structure, and I'm assuming people on your left on that report are your management. I must commend you, because you've got more women than men in that regard. But from the board perspective, you've got more women, more men than men. More men than women. And please help me understand.
So there are some things that are in my control and there are some things that aren't, right? So my staff are in my control. The way the BUSA board is appointed We have essentially 4 categories of members in BUSA. The one is called, we've termed unisectoral members, and those are organizations that represent a particular sector, like BUSA, like Minerals Council, and so on. The second is a corporate sector, which is essentially BLSA, representing corporates. The third is chambers, so things like agribusiness and small business development chamber, small business institute, and so on. And the fourth is professional organizations. Each of these categories appoint a number of directors.
Representatives.
So the unisectoral has 4 directors on the board, and they go through a process of appointment. And if through the unisectoral organizations there are more than 4 appointments, then we go through a process of election, and that's how the directors are appointed. So,
but can I interject
Yeah.
here? I mean, we've had to show seriousness from the side of the ANC in particular. At one point, they came up and said, moving forward, our list in Parliament will be made up of 50% women and 50% men. Is it not possible for BUSA to show seriousness in terms of inclusivity and to close the gender gap that exists at the leadership level of your board? Is it not possible for BUSA to put up such regulations or such company policies that says we want 50-50 representation of our board members?
No, because we are a voluntary organization. We can't set policies for our members. A banking association doesn't need to belong to BUSA. Okay, we can say that this is how we're going to conduct affairs at the board, and so on and so on. But so we have, I don't know, the 14, 15 unisectoral members, right? I have absolutely no power to tell those 14 members that this is how you're going to appoint your representatives on the board. Okay, and usually what we seek from our members is that either the CEO of that organization or the chair of the board of that organization, in them looking at their directorships on the BUSA board, they should try to have those directorships from either the CEO of the organizations or the chair of the board. Okay, so if the CEO of the majority of the unisectoral organizations, and I'm not saying it is the case, I can't say offhand, but let's say the CEOs of the majority of the unisectoral organizations are men, then
that's what
I'm going to get, right? So it's those organizations that need to deal with the gender issues. But I think there has been progress. We should have looked at the BUSA board a few years ago. It looked much worse. So these are issues that we consistently deal with. As I said, what's in my jurisdiction, so my staff complement I'm certainly looking at. And in fact, we've just, can't remember from where, but we've just been given an award for our gender representation.
Congratulations for that.
But on the board representation, we
It's
consistently push. But if look, I think most sectors are pushing for better gender representation, and there is improvement, but there's only so much I can do.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for that. It's just one of those things, Mr. Coovadia, that one have observed.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a valid point.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely valid point.
And it's not only with BUSA here. As a nation, we've been so much about racial representation, and somehow looks like gender part has fallen by the wayside.
No,
so
I fully acknowledge that. I think it's a valid point.
Yeah. So, but Mr. Coovadia, thank you very much for making time to be with us. We, in conclusion, I think we as a country are in desperate need of investment, and we need to create an environment in which investment and investors could feel safe. An environment where we eradicate systems that hold women back so that everybody can contribute toward making this country what it has potential to be.
Absolutely.
And for me, Mr. Coovadia, that is the bigger picture. That's the reason why we should continue talking, we should continue pushing to have some of these ideals possible. And with those words, thank you very much for making time.
Thank you very much.
All
I
right.
fully agree with you. We're on the same page.
It was lovely
Thank you.
being with you here.
Nice chatting to you.